Hello, welcome to this 10th part of the top-down programming logic. Now, if you have been watching all of these videos, then wow, fantastic. I hope you learned something so far. I always learn something when I'm doing these. You know, I kind of do these videos, and actually, whilst I'm speaking to myself, I'm kind of refining, making better the way that I program as well, because you always think, oh well, I just program this way, but actually doing these things as well and speaking out loud and looking at which things you can make better tends to make you a better programmer as well. And working with other people to give each other ideas is always a good thing. But it's the concept is always to keep it simple, stupid, is to make it separated. You know, when you write a book, not that I've ever written a book, you don't just start with the first line, the first word of the first chapter. You know, first of all, you work out a brief script of what the story is going to be. You know, and then step by step you work out how to put that into chapters, and then each chapter then needs to have kind of sections of it, of what's going to happen. And then once you've done that for the whole book, you kind of know where. That's why when they make films, they do like screenwriting first of all. They do lots of pictures of the film. They don't just go jump straight into making the film, although they have made a couple of films like that. Okay, so what we need to do now is, for the sake of finishing off this user object, just to say that this is the final video part of this login stage. Okay. We could go on and on and on with it, but for the sake of moving on to something else, we're going to say that this final thing is this part of the user model is done. if you've gotten this far and you've understood it, then doing all of the database checks and stuff like that, this should be easy to you. Okay. If you've struggled with getting this far, then it's something really which you should have a really rethink about and continue to practice and try and get the idea of how to do this, because you could spend a day, 2 days practicing the likes of MySQL or PDO or whatever to get better at it, but if you don't have any logic behind how you've actually got to make a class object or an interface to make it work efficiently. Anyway, enough ranting. Let's move on. So we have got our user interface, which is here. So now we need to essentially make a user model interface. Okay. So user model interface.php. It's there. Interface user model. Oh, so we want user model interface. Okay, so what do we need in the user model interface? First things first is we already know essentially what the user is in the user object. Okay, so we need to kind of initiate the user model to tell them what we want to do, but we can kind of do that in, well, okay, for the sake of this, let's say public function sets user ID. Okay, seems like a pretty logical thing, is rather than having to supply the user ID every single request, we'll set the user ID. And okay, so that's going to be an int there, and sets the user ID of the user in question. Okay, and returns void. Now another way, because this is a user model, another way that we might want to search for the user is via the username. Okay, so we can have another method of doing this is by using the username instead. You never know, you know, forward thinking. We write this function now, method now, so it's the username of the user in question, and username. So that's done. Now, the user model doesn't. We don't really care about getting the user ID or the username because we kind of know it already. We just want to essentially be able to get a user. That's the whole idea of this, is that the user model interface can go to the user's table and it can extract the information for a user. Now there's privileges and so on that you need to think about with this. Can one user access another user's data by knowing their user ID and so on? So there's different things that you'd need to think about in the future, but there are other things. Now let's go to the user object, set user model, load. So this is essentially where we need to load this, the user ID. So this is kind of where the model takes place. Get user, the load is the one really doing it. Get name, that's so the load function method is the one that's going to load the data and populate the user object here. All right. Get name, get surname, set username, save, and save is going to be the one as well. So we essentially need to have. We're going to call this one updates, and this is going to have a user object as a parameter. Why? Because we don't want to have like a ton of information that's there. As long as the user object has all of the relevant properties that the table needs, then they just need to be able to extract them out and put them together and then do a final update query on the database. So this parameter user objects, and then return Boolean, obviously, because it needs to be able to say whether it was been done properly. And also we're going to put this as a reference into it as well, because it seems logical that whatever we send in, if we make changes to it, then it gets updated as well. So it doesn't really need to return anything. The Boolean is the way that it was successful. Okay, so when the update method is called, we want to know whether it's successful or not. Now, by passing something in as a reference means you can essentially return two things. Yeah, because you can't. There's no point returning an array of result and then something else. You might as well just pass something in as a reference and then update it, and then you know that you can check the thing that you passed in. Okay, that's the way it works. Updates the user row within the users table. A user ID must be set within the user model in order to know which user it is that is being updated within the user model or within the user objects. Now it seems quite logical that the user ID is going to be within inside of the user object, because we know that we've got the user ID in here, yeah, and we've got well, that's something really then that we need to update this user interface as well. Okay, because we've got get user, get username, surname, and potentially we want to have public function get user ID as well. Oops. And and we'll go and grab that wherever it was. Alt note here, and let's update this and returns int gets the user ID of the user in question. That'll do. Okay, we'll just copy this, put this in the user object as well, wherever the user ID may be. There it is. Return this user ID, and then the interface. Take this, and let's give this a some ints and user ID. The user ID is the primary key of the users table. Any requests to the user model should use the user ID as the main identifier. There we go. Okay, so that's that bit done there. So we know the user ID must be set within the user model or within the user object in order to know which data it is that is being, or which user it is that is being updated. The user ID can be obtained by a call on the user object get user ID method. Okay, that's essentially what we're saying that it should do. So we've got updates, user model. For the time being, I don't see that there's anything else. Okay, there's delete, obviously. Well, for the sake of it, what we will have for forward thinking is then a create, and we'll pass this in as a reference as well, because the create method passes in a user object. So we instantiate one, we fill in the relevant details, we pass it into create, and then the one thing that it does need is a user ID. So once create is finished, it can get the user ID, update user object, and then you know that you've got a fully functional user object which is there. Okay, and creates a user within the users table. A user ID will be generated once the user has been successfully inserted. All relevant properties should be populated within the user object prior to this call. Any properties which are not populated will be inserted with a default value. And this is going to be then, Boolean as well, which is good. Okay, so we've got updates, and really the final one that we need is then get user. set user ID, update. Okay, which we're gonna call it is load. Okay, and we're gonna say user ID is null in this, simply because you can do set user ID here, or set username. Loads the user, extracts or gets the user data from the users table and returns a user. See, this is the thing here, is that right, we're gonna for this we're gonna pass in a user object, because I don't want the two. I don't want the. Yeah, now this is the way we're going to do it, because essentially it means that with inside of load it then has to instantiate a user object and so on. So we potentially don't want that. We want to know that load just needs to check properties of the user object itself to go from there. Now the only small issue with this is that the user object has private properties here, but that's the whole point of having an interface. Yeah, is that you've got different properties here that can be used. It's yeah, that's the way we're going to do it. We're going to do it the kind of long way. It's a little bit cleaner. It's more explicit. The thing is when you start making changes to the database table and information doesn't go in, and then you kind of think, well, actually, if I just let it add properties to the object and then come back again, then it's sped up a little bit because you've not had to do the programming of it, because you made it easy, but it's prone to errors. Whereas if you've explicitly set these things in one method, and when you edit the table, remember the person creating the user model predominantly is a person who's going to be accessing the database and knowing all of the rows and stuff in the database. So they're the ones creating this. So when you're working on the user model and you know you've got to load, then you know that this is the place that you're going to do all of the loading, to edit all of the things that are relevant and create and so on. So these are the methods that you'll be creating. So load. Yeah, we're going to leave it with this. So parameter type is then user objects, and this is going to return boolean, and returns a user pre-populated user object. So it means that a user object as such this is probably something that we might have to change. Not necessarily, because okay, the user model, set user model here, this doesn't actually know what user it's working for at the moment. So if you want to do load, it's going to be need to be loaded at one point. So that's small details that need to be worked out. Okay, so load is done. So that's that there. We can copy all of this for the time being, and we'll crack on with making the user model. Models, make a new one, user model.php, user model implements user model interface. Come here, set user ID, set username, create, load. Okay, so the most important thing is that we need a private user ID, and we're going to keep it as this. Name convention. How do we set it in the others? Okay, all of the properties of the table we've set without an underscore. Null. So this user ID equals then user ID, and private username equals null, updates. Now I don't want to be storing this, okay, because essentially it's a user model, and once it goes in, then that's all we're concentrating here on, is updating this one, because it allows for a user model to be generic, okay, whereas if we set it to one user, then we can't use it for everything else, okay. So updating this by passing it in, a user model can just literally do it on this one. It can execute this call on this one update. Okay, so we need a call is a query is made to the user's database, etc., and the user in the table is updated using the user object. So for example, we do now is then just get name, and just to go through this, is we're kind of building the table that we've got already. Get username, user ID equals this. It's writing lots of code, but get user ID, etc., 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 and then we can do, you know, there we write it, so that select updates, users set name equals to name, and surname I've had a brain. Set name to name. I'm really having my brain's frozen at the moment on SQL. If I've written this wrong, then I'm going to kick myself afterwards. Equals to surname, and username equals to username. It is 6:27 AM in the morning. I've been up all night programming and I'm tired. Where user ID equals yeah. Okay, so there would be other stuff that you would potentially need to do about this. So query equals MySQL query, and I'm a big fan of using PDO, but I'm just using MySQL because it's easier, and if query and then yeah, that's then return true. That's essentially it. Otherwise, return false. That's how it would kind of be. Yeah, update. It's probably going to be called update users. Set name equal to that, and surname equal to that. Username equal to that. It's bugging me now. This it's really bugging me. Everyone forgets stuff, you know. But that's why we have Google. There we go. There we go. It is all a learning curve, you know. That's what it is, and I've done multiple videos on MySQL, but uh, if you don't do some certain coding at some time, um, there's lots of syntax to learn in everything, and there's nothing wrong with forgetting things. You know, that's if you seem to think that you've got to be able to remember all of this stuff. No, you don't. It's a very clever person once told me, don't ever try and learn everything. It's better to learn where the answer is rather than to learn the whole book. Okay, so it's like having your own library at home. If at one point you can't quite remember it, just knowing which book you've got to go to find the answer, and then remembering which chapter you've got to go to, and then when you do forget it, it takes just 2 or 3 minutes to go to the book, to open the book, look in the book where it is, and go, ah, that was it. And over time, your brain will put it into its core memory, you know, and that's when you will learn it. And whether or not there's a comma or an and there, you know, that took me like 2 seconds to look on Google here, look on MySQL, just to see it. There we go. That was it. Quick check, and then I found it. And that's the whole idea of this, is if you do forget something, then well, so be it. Anyway, moving on. Updates, creates. So once again, we can kind of copy this, come in here and get name, surname, user ID. Well, potentially it won't have a user ID at the moment, so remove that, and then we would just do SQL insert into users, values, and we've got user ID, for example. I don't know, we've got let's just say we've got name, whoops, and we've got surname. You got what I'm talking about in here. And then SQL, we can budge this, and essentially if this is all being inserted, then we can get the user ID, and we can say last insert ID, and if user ID, then we can say user objects sets. Okay, there we're coming along this now. Set user ID is what we need. So essentially we need to go back to the user interface, and we need to do a setter method for this. So set user ID, and parameter is then this, sets the user ID of the user. And come to this user object, come to the top, user ID equals here, get user ID, set user ID, and this user ID equals user ID. Obviously we can't set it because it's private. Okay, there's some pros and cons against doing this, but this is the way I want to do it. Set user ID, user ID. There we go. Alright, so now this is being populated once again, and otherwise it's going to return false, and if it is all okay, then we can return true. As simple as that. Okay, load. So this is, we can write this. So user ID equals user object gets user ID, and SQL equals select everything from users where user ID equals user ID, and then query, for example, is equals MySQL query SQL, and if query, and then we'll row equals MySQL fetch we'll do fetch object, shall we? Fetch object, and if is object, for example, I'd just like to do an explicit check, and for and then so we're just going to say user ID, user model, so user object sets user ID equals row user ID, and you got the idea from there, and then return true. Okay, and if it's wrong, then return false. So that's essentially setting all of the data within inside. So this is the element that I'm talking about right now, is the place where the actual user data would get set in the user object. So that's a person who needs to know who's the person who's created the user, you know, as in the logic behind of it goes, right, well, a user object should have this. That's why the programmer of who's doing the program, the user model, should be the one that creates the user object interface itself to know which properties it should have. Okay, so we've got load, and that's pretty much it done. So it means that essentially within inside of our user objects, within the load, we've got a set model. We can this can now be user model, whoops, and load. Okay, now the great thing about this just be this. Okay, after that, because we know that load user model load just needs to have it essentially needs to have a user ID, right? Well, as long as the object's got to think about this now. The objects, yeah, that's fine, because look, we're setting the user ID here and load, and if load, for example, then return true, else return false. So you know that you've set the user ID here, and what you're sending through is this, so this actual object, into the load method, because it's passed through by reference. Okay, get user ID load, yeah, that's fine. Get name, set name, get surname, set surname, save. Okay, so then this is then here we effectively we don't, yeah, Saving would be essentially when you've created the user. Um, you've created the user, and if any of the properties have been changed using a relevant set method, then a call to save must be carried out to make permanent changes to the database. Okay, we're gonna update the rules on this user interface on save. We'll say saved must only be used for pre-existing users within the database. A new user must be created using the insert method. All right, so we're gonna add a new method of inserts, and this obviously is going to take itself to the model. And okay, inserts a user into the users table. All properties must be set prior to making within the object prior to making a call to save. We're going to say that it returns boolean, and that's it. Okay, so we're going to copy this, come to the user objects, and say insert and save, and we're going to explicitly check if user ID is equal to null. Then we'll take this, user ID is null, no updates can be made on this user. That's it. Otherwise, and we put return anyway, although it's thrown an exception. We want if this user model and then updates, and we say this, return true. Otherwise, you got it, return false. Simple as that. And insert is going to pretty much be the same thing, but not equal to null is not null. Updates must be made by using the saved method. Okay, so we're just basically making certain that we don't recreate the same user all the time. Okay, and this is create instead. All right. So that's that bit done. So we can go back to save, inserts, get username, set surname, whatever, load, get user, load, done, set model. Yeah, it's cool. So hopefully we should start being able to go back to here, factory get active user. Let's just check this, loading it, and so potentially we need to say so in this, although we're creating a new object, we need to know that that the load call has been okay, and we're going to return this here. Otherwise, we're going to return false. Okay. So we fix that now. Set active user ID. Yeah, we don't care about that now. Get login model. Yeah, fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. As long as user is instance of there, we've got that. Okay. The other thing, which we effectively login objects, login objects here is then the setting of the updating of the user. So we want to come to execute, potentially login, set cookie, user ID, set active user, and it was in login, update last login here. Okay. If user exists, login model, timestamp there. Okay, so this is potentially our login model is where we're going. This here is where it could be helpful to have a user instead. You understand what I mean? So it could be helpful that the rather than this method, this class doing it, we could leave it to as the responsibility then of the user here. So once it has been logged in, to update its last login, which would effectively where we would I'm not going to do it here. I'm not going to do it in this video, but because that would be another thing. But essentially, it would just be changing around to add. Oh, let's just get it done. Let's just get it done. Okay, so user interface is, we need two methods: function set last login and timestamp function, and then get last login. Okay, those two are there. Copy these, come to the user objects. I'm going to stick these down the bottom. Insert, save, get username, put it here. And private and last login equals null. This set last login equals timestamp, and return this last login. Okay, so it means that we come to here and get active user, and get active user should be then, so set last login. Oops, why don't we do that then? So it's time, that's timestamp, and then okay, this is the wrong place to do it. It's here. We have an active user, set last login, and if user, okay, and we want save, and user interface, user object, sorry. Save doesn't need a parameter. It needs to know that the user ID is done and it updates itself. So we know that we can do if not save, because we'll just continue on, and we'll then throw a new exception something really bad happens in this call. Okay, so that's essentially you updating the last login itself. So we're going to go back to the factory, and actually it's the login class, wherever that was again, the login objects, and it was in login itself, the login methods, and we're just going to scrap this. Okay, we're going to scrap that there, and we're going to leave the rest. We're going to leave the rest to update last login, not used anymore, just so the sake of it's still in the code. There is a kind of technical word for this, but not used anymore. Yeah, okay, so we've rectified that now. We knew that that was the only point that it was being done. So that's essentially this bit done. In my eyes, the 95% of this login part is done. Okay. Yeah, there's nothing nothing really left to do on it, because you know that the user has logged in. So at this point you could do a redirect, knowing that the user now has an active cookie. In my eyes, the situation right now would be to do a complete new redirect, even if your code is going to continue now, because if the user's not active, then comes to here. Okay, alright, fine. Then we have got a final stage that we need to do. Okay, so the user's not there. And the user is active, so it means that effectively the user is active, so we can go straight to get active user. Yeah, equals factory get active user. Alright, now let's go back to factory and go to active user and check this is all okay. Okay, so if self active user is not equal to null, return it. Well, in this case it's going to be null because nothing's been done yet. If set active user ID is equal to null, return false, failure of login object. Okay, so it means that at this one point in time we need to know whether there was a cookie. That's the main thing. So but let's check the login object once again for is active. It's easier just to navigate to that then. Set expires. So it can get a little bit confusing. Executes. Set cookie. Set active user. Alright, so it's potentially we've not got a way yet with inside of the login element to actually check whether the cookie exists. So get login instance, login is active. Right, so the check it's going to be it's going to fail at this every single time and come to here. Okay, because essentially there's no point right now where that the user has a cookie, and we haven't tested whether the cookie is there yet. So let's just write this one code, and let's have a think about it. Let's have one think about it. Is that it's a new request, and it would have flicked over maybe an auto redirect to login to double check if the user is logged in, and if it was, then it would redirect back saying yes, it is logged in. So we need to double check if the cookie has been set. Now to keep it with inside of, I would put it inside of is active, actually, to be honest with you, because it's keeping with it with inside of yeah. We're going to come here, and rather than set cookie domain, set cookie name. Okay, this is what we're gonna take out. We're gonna put there because I want to know that the cookie name has been set already. So is active can check this. All right. This seems more logical to me. Oh, there you go. Come to here. Is active. Okay. So if which properties of cookie name? There it is. If is set cookie stock cookie name. It's all good, but first of all we need to check if this underscore cookie name is equal to null. Then I'm going to throw a new exception. Cookie name is not set. Okay, if the cookie is set, then user ID equals cookie name, which means then login model, username, set username, set cookie, set domain, set expires, set cookie, get error, has errors, executes. We don't need to do an execute, but effectively set active user. That's where we want to go. If it is set, then but we want to check login model is user. Okay, and okay, that's another thing now, is that the login model needs to test whether it is a user, and it only has the user name. Alright, so it's let's come to we're going to come to the login model, and is user, and we're going to I don't want to change it here. Okay, that's something that there needs to be a little bit of rejigging of this one code, okay? Because it's what we need to do is essentially get user if user is active, no, then return if username is equal to null, num errors. This is the issue that we've got right now, is the username. Okay, so right, well, maybe we're thinking this is fine. We can go straight away. We've got a cookie, all right. So maybe we can accomplish this a little bit easier. We want this to succeed and come down to here, because then we can go straight on to get user. All right. So what we essentially want to have is we want a user. Okay. This is what we want. Factory. Get active user, set active user. We want a user instance. Alright, this is what we want. Come down to this one here. I'm going to copy this. I want a user instance. Get user instance. Yeah. And load user model user. New user objects. Change this to user. Turn this to user. And here once again, this to me is the easiest option. Return user objects. Okay. So here we say get user instance, and we can turn around and just say load. Okay, load user information from the database using the user ID as an identifier. It returns true if the user is loaded and false if not. Boom, done. Okay, so this here is a case of the check that we can make is the cookie. All right, so it's we're going to make another method here. If cookie, if user has cookie, all right. So this is going to return true or false. All right. So we're going to go to user interface. We're going to come down to here. We're going to say public function has cookie. And then we're going to come to our user objects, come down to the bottom. Public function has cookie here, and if is set conf login cookie domain, login cookie name, then return true. Yeah, and HasCookie will load this as well. Okay, so user ID equals login cookie name, and this load here. So because this will tell us whether the user has cookie or not. Return true, else everything else is going to be false anyway. Okay, so very simple. This has cookie is essentially going to allow us to know whether this has a cookie. Right, so if not active and user has cookie, not user has cookie. So first of all, active is checking whether it's there, one check, and user has cookie. Now we've got a user object up here. We don't need to have well, if it is, then we can set factory. So factory set active user, so user gets user ID, so we know that that's been set as well, and continue on with the application calls. Like I said, it still needs some testing, okay, but it got a little bit rejigged, and because we structured it in such a way, we could rejig it very, very quickly, because nothing is overlapping with each other. All of the calls are happening here, so there's no overlap from user to login, and so on to the models. Everything is happening. So if we take one thing out of another thing, we change it another way, we change it here and we don't change it there. Alright, that's this one video done. I think it went on long enough, and for me this is the login stage finished. Okay, it's not 100% finished, but it's finished to a point where you could, if you've been copying this, you could quite easily finish this yourself. Okay, so that's the test for you, is to see whether you can test it and finish it. Alright, and finish it. There we go. Alright, don't know whether there's going to be a second part to this, as in an additional part. It's definitely not going to be today, but we'll see. We'll see. Let's leave it as that. I don't want to make any promises. I've got a couple of ideas what I could do, but I'm leaving it open-ended. Alright, so it means that I could do some more, or I might not, but there we go. If you have been watching these and you've watched all of them, like every second of it, thank you very much. Really, thank you very much. It's such a great pleasure to know that people watch these, and the response which I get from people is fantastic. I must admit, some of the responses which I get, I do read all of them. They're not negative. They're just I just don't see how someone has tried to learn with them. But if I get a minute to answer them, then I will answer them. But ultimately, I think if you're watching this one little bit now, then you're nothing like these other people. You know, you're someone who's really taking the time and effort to learn. So, which is probably the minority of the people actually who become successful programmers, are the ones that put that extra effort in to understand what they've got to do. But anyway, that's enough of me. Thank you very much, and if you've got any ideas of the next step, then let me know. Alright, bye bye.